The taste of blood was the only thing keeping Kestrel Johnson conscious. It was metallic and sharp, hidden behind a smile that had cost her 3 coats of designer lipstick to perfect. She stood at the threshold of the St. Regis ballroom, the air thick with the scent of 5,000 imported white lilies. To the 400 guests turning their heads, she was a vision in Vera Wang lace, the diamond of Atlanta. To Kestrel, the dress felt like a shroud. Underneath the intricate embroidery, 2 of her ribs were screaming. They had been cracked 3 nights ago when T-Rowe decided she hadn't looked submissive enough during a board meeting. The music began, a haunting, stripped-back violin cover of Great Is Thy Faithfulness. Step, breathe, don't faint. Before we see if Kestrel makes it down the aisle. We want to know, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your city or country in the comments. And look, if you're going to enjoy this high-stakes drama without subscribing to my Afro-Korean boss stories, the least you can do is tell us why in the comments. Don't let YouTube hide the next part from you. Join the family. Her father, Abraham Johnson, beamed beside her, his hand heavy on her arm. He didn't notice her shallow breaths. He didn't notice the way she winced when his tuxedo sleeve brushed against her side. He only saw the merger. The Johnson real estate empire was finally marrying the Miller Street tech dominance. Smile, princess, Abraham whispered, his voice vibrating with greed. Today, we become untouchable. Kestrel's eyes scanned the crowd, her vision blurring at the edges. She saw the mayors, the senators, even the kingpins. Then she saw him. High in the VIP shadows of the mahogany balcony, a figure stood motionless. He wasn't wearing the festive black tie attire of the other guests. He wore a charcoal gray suit that seemed to swallow the light. Gyeong-hwan, the silent enforcer for the Shinhwa Syndicate, 3 years ago, in a rain-slicked alley in Chicago, he had told her this day would come. He had called her family a nest of vipers. His eyes locked onto hers, cold, flinty, and terrifyingly observant. He didn't look at her dress. He looked at the slight tremor in her hands. He saw the bruise she'd hidden with high-definition concealer. He saw through the lie. She reached the altar. T-Rowe stood there looking every bit the philanthropist in his white tuxedo. As he took her hand, he squeezed hard. His thumb pressed directly into a fresh bruise on her wrist. You look pale, Kestrel, T-Rowe whispered, his eyes gleaming with a predatory hunger. Don't ruin my moment by falling out. The pastor began the liturgy, but the words were a dull roar in Kestrel's ears. Her hand, hidden by the cascading lilies of her bouquet, felt a sudden, sharp vibration. The burner phone. She risked a glance downward. The screen glowed through the white petals. One new message. G.H. Look at the wine. The viper is biting back. Kestrel's heart hammered against her cracked ribs. At the center of the altar sat the silver communion chalice. Her father and T-Rowe were about to share it, a symbolic sealing of their blood-soaked pact. She looked back up at Gyeong-hwan. He hadn't moved. He was watching the chalice like a sniper watches a target. Take, eat, drink, the pastor intoned. Abraham Johnson reached for the cup first. He took a long celebratory swallow. Kestrel watched as the color drained from her father's face in real time. It wasn't a slow decline. It was a violent, systematic shutdown. His eyes didn't just roll back. They burst with broken capillaries. He let out a wet, gurgling sound that cut through the violin music like a jagged blade. The chalice hit the marble floor, the red wine spilling out like an arterial spray. Abraham collapsed, his body convulsing at Kestrel's feet. The ballroom erupted, screams of horror clashing with the sound of chairs being kicked back. Kestrel didn't move to help him. She couldn't. She dropped to her knees, but not out of grief. She screamed, a raw, jagged sound that had been trapped in her throat for years. She looked at T-Rowe, and expecting to see shock, instead, she saw a grin, a slow, terrifyingly satisfied smile. The empire is mine, Kestrel. T-Rowe leaned down, his voice barely audible over the chaos. And so are you. He reached out to grab her hair, to claim his prize amidst the carnage. But before his fingers could touch a single strand of her veil, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom didn't just open. They exploded off their hinges. Gyeong-hwan didn't jump from the balcony. He appeared from the smoke of the doorway, like a ghost made of shadow and steel, a weighted tactical baton expanding in his hand with a lethal clack. The girl, Gyeong-hwan's voice rang out, low and melodic, yet carrying over the screams of 400 people, is under Shinhwa protection. Anyone who touches her dies today. The ballroom was no longer a sanctuary of the elite. It was a slaughterhouse of reputations. The metallic tang of blood from Abraham Johnson's convulsing body mixed with the cloyingly sweet scent of the lilies, creating a nauseating perfume. Kestrel stayed on her knees, her white lace dress soaking up the spilled wine, or was it blood, like a thirsty sponge. T-Rowe didn't flinch at the sound of the doors exploding. He was a man who had built to his throne on the bodies of those he'd stepped over in Bankhead. He didn't fear a grand entrance. He looked at Gyeong-hwan with a smirk that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. You're a long way from home, Shinhwa, T-Rowe shouted over the din of fleeing socialites. This is Atlanta. The syndicate doesn't have a seat at this table anymore. T-Rowe's security, 6 men in tailored suits with the unmistakable bulk of subcompact rifles under their jackets, stepped forward, forming a wall of meat and Kevlar between Gyeong-hwan and the altar. Kestrel looked down at her father. Abraham's hands were clawing at the air, his fingernails scratching the marble. He looked at Kestrel, his eyes pleading for help, for a phone, for a doctor. For the first time in her 26 years, Kestrel felt nothing. No, not nothing. She felt a cold, crystalline clarity. She leaned in close, her veil falling forward like a curtain shielding their final moment from the cameras. You told me I was just an asset, Dad, she whispered, her voice a ghost of a blade. Assets don't save their owners. They just get liquidated. She watched the light leave his eyes, a final twitch of his jaw marking the end of the Johnson real estate dynasty. Grab the girl, T-Rowe barked. 2 of the guards lunged. Kestrel braced for the impact, her cracked ribs pulsing with a rhythmic stabbing heat. She expected the rough handling she'd grown used to. Instead, she heard a sound like a whip cracking against a stone wall. Gyeong-hwan had moved. He didn't run, he blurred. The weighted tactical baton in his hand was an extension of a will made of iron. The first guard didn't even have time to draw his weapon before the baton shattered his kneecap. The second guard reached for Kestrel's arm, but Gyeong-hwan's hand, calloused and cold, caught the man's wrist. With a sickening pop, the guard's radius bone snapped. Gyeong-hwan stepped over the writhing men, his eyes never leaving T-Rowe. He looked like a wolf who had wandered into a kennel of pampered poodles. You made a mistake, Miller, Gyeong-hwan said. His voice was a low, melodic rasp that seemed to vibrate in the very floorboards. You thought Abraham Johnson was the one laundering the money. You thought by killing the head, the body would fall into your lap. Gyeong-hwan stopped 3 feet from Kestrel. He didn't offer his hand. He didn't offer comfort. He offered a reality check. Abraham was the face, Gyeong-hwan continued, his flinty gaze shifting to Kestrel. But the Shinhwa Syndicate only trusts one person with the codes, and it wasn't the man dying in the wine. T-Rowe's face shifted, the smugness flickered, replaced by a twitch of realization. He looked at Kestrel, really looked at her for the first time, not as a trophy, not as a wife, but as the architect of the very empire he was trying to steal. She's a girl, T-Rowe spat, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. She's a real estate brat. She's the one who kept your accounts in the black for 3 years while you were bleeding dry in the tech sector, Gyeong-hwan countered. He turned his back on T-Rowe, a supreme gesture of disrespect, and looks down at Kestrel. Get up, Kestrel. The lace doesn't suit you. It never did. Kestrel struggled to find her footing. The pain in her side was a dull roar now, a physical reminder of her weakness. As she rose, T-Rowe saw his opening. He pulled a gold-plated Glock from his waistband, pointing it directly at Gyeong-hwan's back. I don't care who she is, T-Rowe snarled. I'll kill you both and find the codes in her blood. The ballroom went silent. The last of the guests had scrambled into the foyer. It was just the dead man, the predator, the parasite, and the phoenix. Kestrel felt the burner phone vibrate in her hand again. A second text. She didn't need to look at it. She knew what it said. The Shinhwa Syndicate didn't just protect their own. They erased their enemies. Suddenly, the crystal chandeliers above them flickered and died. The emergency lights kicked in, a harsh, industrial red that bathed the white ballroom in the color of a fresh wound. You think you're the only one who brought a team to a wedding, Terrence? Gyeong-hwan asked softly. From the shadows of the choir loft, red laser dots appeared. They danced across T-Rowe's chest, his throat, and finally his forehead. T-Rowe froze. The gold-plated gun felt very heavy and very useless. Wait, my men are already in Savannah, Gyeong-hwan said, stepping into Kestrel's personal space. He smelled of rain and expensive tobacco, a sharp contrast to the smell of death at her feet. They are at your mother's house. They are at your distribution hubs. By the time the sun rises, the name Miller will be a footnote in a police report. Gyeong-hwan reached out, his thumb brushing a smudge of her father's blood off her cheek. His touch was electric, a terrifying jolt that made Kestrel's breath hitch. You have two choices, Kestrel, he whispered, loud enough only for her. You can stay here and let the FBI ask you why your father died at your wedding, or you can come with me and watch the world burn. Kestrel looked at T-Rowe, who was shaking, his eyes darting toward the exits. And then she looked at the dead man who had sold her like a piece of livestock. She felt the weight of the burner phone, the key to $3 billion, and the weight of the bruises under her ribs. She took a step toward Gyeong-hwan, her hand sliding into his. His grip was like iron, unyielding and dangerous. Burn it, she said. Burn all of it. Gyeong-hwan's lip curled into the ghost of a smile. He turned to his men, who were now appearing from the shadows in full tactical gear. Liquidation begins now, he ordered. Leave the groom for the feds. He's more useful as a corpse in a cage. As Gyeong-hwan led her toward the back exit, Kestrel didn't look back. She didn't see the police lights beginning to strobe against the stained glass windows. She only felt the cold air of the Atlanta night hitting her face. That in the realization that she hadn't just escaped a marriage, she had started a war. The transition from the ballroom to the night air was a sensory assault. One moment, Kestrel was surrounded by the suffocating scent of lilies and death. The next, the humid Atlanta night air whipped at her veil, tearing it from her hair. Gyeong-hwan's grip on her hand was the only thing anchoring her to the earth. They weren't walking. They were moving with tactical urgency. Gyeong-hwan's men, shadows in matte black gear, formed a moving perimeter around them. The apex predator didn't look back at the St. Regis, which was now hemorrhaging terrified guests and echoing with the first distant wails of sirens. Move, Gyeong-hwan commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the adrenaline-fueled ringing in Kestrel's ears. They reached a line of blacked-out SUVs idling at the curb. As Gyeong-hwan guided her toward the lead vehicle, Kestrel's body finally hit its limit. The adrenaline that had masked her injuries during the ceremony evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow agony. Her knees buckled. She didn't hit the pavement. Gyeong-hwan's arm swept around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. The contact was jarring. The hardness of his tactical vest against her cracked ribs made her vision white out. A jagged, broken sound escaped her lips, not a scream of grief, but a sob of pure physical failure. My ribs, she gasped, her fingers clutching at the charcoal wool of his suit jacket. T-Rowe He did it 3 days ago. Gyeong-hwan's entire demeanor shifted. The cold mechanical efficiency flickered into something darker, a focus, a lethal heat. He didn't ask for permission. He lifted her effortlessly, her heavy silk train draping over his arm like a fallen flag, and slid her into the back seat of the SUV. June, Gyeong-hwan barked at the driver. Medical kit, now, and tell the perimeter to widen. If a single Miller Scout follows us, erase them. Inside the SUV, the world was muffled, encased in bulletproof glass and the smell of leather and gun oil. The dome light stayed off, leaving them bathed in the rhythmic red and blue strobes of the police cruisers now swarming the hotel entrance. Gyeong-hwan knelt in the narrow space between the seats. His hands, which had just shattered bones in the ballroom, moved with haunting precision. He pulled a pair of trauma shears from the medical kit. I need to see the damage, Kestrel, he said. It wasn't a request, and it was a directive. He began to cut. The Vera Wang lace, the dress that was supposed to symbolize her union with the most powerful man in Atlanta, was sliced away in ribbons. As the fabric fell, the reality of her martyrdom was revealed. The bruising was a deep, ugly violet, stretching across her pale ribs in the shape of a man's hand. Gyeong-hwan's jaw tightened so hard Kestrel heard his teeth grind. You did the merger reports with this? He asked, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. I had to, Kestrel whispered, her head leaning back against the leather. If I showed weakness, my father would have given the codes to T-Rowe early. I had to stay valuable until the wedding. I thought I could escape before the vows. Gyeong-hwan pulled a specialized medical wrap from the kit. You were never an asset to them, Kestrel. You were a miracle they didn't deserve. They treated a Stradivarius like a common fiddle. He began to wrap her torso. Each pass of the bandage was a mix of agony and relief. He was close, so close she could see the flecks of gold in his flint gray eyes. The air between them was charged with something more than just the danger of the night. It was the seductive danger of being seen, truly seen by a monster. Why are you doing this? She asked, her voice trembling as he tightened the wrap. You said my family were vipers. You said I chose the nest. Gyeong-hwan paused, his hands resting just below her heart. I don't say vipers, Kestrel. I relocate them when they prove they can bite the hand that tries to cage them. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small encrypted tablet. He tapped the screen and a live feed appeared. Kestrel's breath hitched. It was a thermal drone feed of her mother's estate in Savannah. Look, he commanded. On the screen, 3 black vans had pulled into her mother's driveway. Men were spilling out T-Rowe's cleaners. They were there to tie up loose ends. They were there to delete the Johnson bloodline. T-Rowe knew he couldn't keep you if your mother was alive to claim the estate, Gyeong-hwan explained coldly. He wasn't just marrying you, he was replacing you. Kestrel watched, frozen, as the men reached the front door. But before they could breach, the screen erupted in small white flashes. Gyeong-hwan's ghost had been waiting in the tree line. The attackers fell in seconds, silent and systematic. Your mother is safe. She is being moved to a Shinhwa freighter as we speak, Gyeong-hwan said, shutting the tablet. But you are dead to the world, Kestrel. The explosion at the doors, the fire starting in the kitchens, the news will report that the bride vanished in the inferno. The SUV lurched into motion, pulling away from the St. Regis just as a news chopper's searchlight swept the street. We are going to Newark, Gyeong-hwan said, sitting back and finally allowing himself to look out the window. The syndicate has a facility there. T-Rowe thinks he's hiding in the Hamptons. He thinks he's safe behind his firewalls and his lawyers. Gyeong-hwan looked back at her, his expression unreadable. He's going to spend the next 48 hours watching everything he loves turn to ash, and you are going to watch it with me. Kestrel felt the weight of the burner phone in her lap. She thought about the vial of poison. She thought about the way her father's eyes had looked as he died. She wasn't the Diamond of Atlanta anymore. She was a ghost in the hands of a demon. What happens when he's gone? Kestrel asked, her voice gaining a new cold edge. What happens to the codes? Gyeong-hwan leaned forward, his face inches from hers. The apex predator was no longer protecting her. He was evaluating her. The codes are the only reason you're in this car, Kestrel. Don't forget that. I've spent 3 years waiting for you to realize that you're the most dangerous person in every room you walk into. Now that you've finally drawn blood, don't stop until the floor is flooded. He handed her a glass of amber liquid from the car's small bar. Drink. It's for the pain. We have a long drive, and by morning, the liquidation of the Miller family begins. Kestrel took the glass. Her hands were still shaking, but as the burning liquid hit her throat, she felt the phoenix within her begin to stir. She looked at Gyeong-hwan, the man who had haunted her dreams and saved her life, and realized she didn't want a hero. She wanted the devil, and he was sitting right in front of her. The Newark industrial outskirts were a graveyard of rusted iron and gray concrete, but the Shinhwa facility was a hidden temple of glass and steel. As the SUV glided through 3 separate reinforced gates, the gritty reality of the Jersey docks vanished. They descended into a subterranean garage that looked more like a museum than a mafia hideout. Gyeong-hwan didn't wait for his men to open the door. He stepped out and reached back for Kestrel. This time, she didn't wait to be carried. She braced her hand against the leather seat, took a shallow, sharp breath against the medical wrap, and stepped onto the polished concrete. Walk, Gyeong-hwan said, his hand hovering just inches from the small of her back. The pain is a liar, Kestrel. It tells you that you're broken, so you'll stop moving. Don't listen to it. They ascended in a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling penthouse. The lair was a masterpiece of cold corporate luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the dark, churning waters of the Atlantic, but the interior was all warmth, dark wood, deep leather, and the scent of expensive wood smoke and sandalwood. This is my sanctuary, Gyeong-hwan said, shedding his charcoal jacket and tossing it onto a Mies van der Rohe chair. While you are here, you are invisible. To the FBI, you are a casualty of the St. Regis fire. To T-Rowe, you are a ghost he's desperate to exhume. He gestured toward a sprawling master suite. Clean yourself. There is a physician on standby in the next room if the wrap loosens. I have business to attend to. Kestrel didn't move. She stood in the center of the vast living area, her shredded wedding dress now stained with wine, blood, and road grit, looking like a tattered flag of a defeated nation. Business? You mean the liquidation? Gyeong-hwan paused, his hand on a decanter of crystal. He turned, his flinty eyes tracing the line of her throat. I mean the surgery. T-Rowe is a cancer. He thinks he can hide in the Hamptons behind a wall of high-priced mercenaries and offshore shell companies. He doesn't realize that I own the cables those companies run on. He poured a drink and walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the silk rug. He stopped just inches away, the heat radiating from him like a furnace. You've spent your life being the accountant, Kestrel. You've seen the world through spreadsheets and ledgers. Tonight, I'm going to show you how those numbers translate into reality. He reached out, his fingers hooking under the remaining lace of her neckline. He didn't pull. He just felt the weight of the fabric. Wash the blood off. When you come out, we begin. An hour later, Kestrel emerged from the suite. The Vera Wang was gone, replaced by a silk robe the color of a bruised plum. Her skin was scrubbed raw, the scent of expensive hotel soap failing to mask the phantom smell of the altar. She found Gyeong-hwan in a glass-walled command center adjacent to the living room. The room was bathed in the blue glow of a dozen monitors. 3 men in tactical headsets worked in silence, their fingers flying over keyboards. This was the dark heart of the Shinhwa Syndicate. Sit, Gyeong-hwan commanded, gesturing to a leather chair beside him. On the main screen, a map of the United States was lit up with dozens of red icons. Each one represented a piece of T-Rowe's empire. Distribution hubs in Houston, server farms in San Jose, and the philanthropic foundations in Atlanta. T-Rowe thinks he won today because your father is dead, Gyeong-hwan said, leaning over her chair. He smelled of fresh cedar now. He thinks the assets default to him through the marriage contract. But look, he tapped a key. One by one, the red icons began to turn gray. Houston just went dark, one of the technicians reported. The Shinhwa team seized the warehouse. We've redirected the inventory to our New York docks. The San Jose servers? Gyeong-hwan asked. Wiped. We've initiated the scorched earth protocol on his tech patents. By dawn, his intellectual property won't exist in any legal database. Kestrel watched, mesmerized. She had spent years moving numbers to hide her father's crimes, but she had never seen power exercised with such clinical, terrifying speed. It was a justice fantasy playing out in real time. The men who had threatened her, the system that had protected T-Rowe's cruelty, it was being dismantled with a few keystrokes. You're not just killing his business, Kestrel whispered. You're erasing his existence. Death is too quick for a man like Miller, Gyeong-hwan said, his voice dropping to a seductive, dangerous register. He needs to feel the vacuum. He needs to realize that without the money he stole from the syndicate and from you, he is nothing but a mediocre man in an expensive suit. Gyeong-hwan turned to her, his gaze intense. But there's a problem, Kestrel. The gray icons. Those are the physical assets. But the liquid capital, the $3 billion your father laundered through the Savannah docks, is still locked. The Shinhwa board in Seoul is getting impatient. The air in the room grew heavy. Kestrel felt the competence trap closing in. Gyeong-hwan wasn't just showing her his power, he was reminding her of her value. The codes, Kestrel said, her voice steadying. You want the codes. I want what belongs to the syndicate, Gyeong-hwan corrected. And I want the woman who was smart enough to hide them from two of the most dangerous men in the South. He leaned in closer, his chest pressing against the arm of her chair. T-Rowe is coming for you, Kestrel. He's already realized the accounts are frozen. He knows the only way he survives the night is if he trades you and those codes to the highest bidder. He's already reached out to the Russian cartel in Brighton Beach. Gyeong-hwan reached out and tilted her chin up. He's going to try to buy his life with yours, and I'm going to let him try. Kestrel's heart hammered. You're using me as bait? I'm using you as a catalyst, Gyeong-hwan replied, his lip curling into that dark, impressed smile. You wanted to be a boss, didn't you? Or you didn't poison your father just to run away and hide in a different cage. You did it to take the chair. Kestrel froze. The secret she'd kept buried, the vial, the tea, the cold calculation of the wedding morning was laid bare in his eyes. He knew. He had always known. How long? She breathed. I saw you by the digitalis in Chicago 2 months ago, Gyeong-hwan whispered. I watched you brew it. I watched you wait. I didn't stop you because I wanted to see if you had the stomach for it. You do. He stepped back, giving her room to breathe, though the air felt thinner than before. Go to sleep, Kestrel. Dream of the empire you're going to build. Tomorrow, we go to the Hamptons. We're going to give T-Rowe the wedding night he actually deserves. As Gyeong-hwan walked out of the command center, leaving her in the blue glow of the dying icons, Kestrel looked at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. She was in the lair of a wolf, protected by a monster, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly, terrifyingly powerful. The morning light in the Newark penthouse was a cold surgical blue. Kestrel sat at the mahogany dining table, dressed in a sharp, tailored black suit Gyeong-hwan's staff had provided. It fit her like armor. The silk robe was gone. The diamond of Atlanta was buried. In her hand, she swirled a cup of black coffee, watching the steam rise as she stared at the tablet Gyeong-hwan had placed before her. The ledger of blood, Gyeong-hwan said, walking into the room. He was dressed for war, a black tactical turtleneck and cargo trousers, his movements fluid and predatory. He didn't sit. He stood behind her, his presence a heavy, grounding weight. That is the real history of the Johnson-Miller Union. Kestrel scrolled through the files. It wasn't just bank statements. It was a digital morgue, photos of shipping manifests, offshore wire transfers, and most hauntingly, surveillance photos of Gyeong-hwan's younger brother. My brother was 22. Gyeong-hwan's voice dropped, the melodic rasp turning into a serrated edge. He wasn't a soldier. He was an analyst. He found a discrepancy in the Savannah accounts, a leak. Your father didn't want the Shinhwa Syndicate to know he was skimming to fund T-Rowe's startup. So he ordered a hit. He made it look like a carjacking in Chicago. Kestrel's fingers trembled against the glass screen. I didn't know. I knew my father was greedy, but I didn't know he was a parasite. Gyeong-hwan interrupted, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder. His grip wasn't aggressive, but it was absolute. He used your brilliance to hide his theft, and he used my brother's life to buy his silence. T-Rowe wasn't just a partner, he was the beneficiary of my brother's murder. Kestrel looked up at him, her neck craned back. Is that why you were in Chicago 3 years ago, hunting him? I was hunting the man who pulled the trigger, Gyeong-hwan said, his eyes like cold flint. But I found something more interesting. I found the girl who was fixing the books, unaware that her pen was dipped in blood. I've spent 3 years watching you, Kestrel, waiting for the moment you realized that you were the only lion in a den of hyenas. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. And the scent of wood smoke and sandalwood was intoxicating, a sensory anchor in the storm of her realization. The syndicate wants the $3 billion. They want the blood debt paid. But I want to see if you can handle the weight of the crown once the hyenas are dead. The vindication of the moment was sharp. For years, Kestrel had felt like a ghost in her own life, a tool for men who didn't understand the complexity of the system she built. Now, the most dangerous man she had ever met was calling her a lion. T-Rowe is moving, Gyeong-hwan said, straightening up. He tapped the tablet and a GPS map appeared. A blinking red dot was moving rapidly away from a mansion in the Hamptons toward the coast. He's panicked. He's realized his accounts are being systematically drained. He's heading for a private pier in Atlantic City. But he's called in a favor from the Russians. They're sending a boat to extract him. And the codes? Kestrel asked. He thinks he can force them out of you, Gyeong-hwan replied. He sent a message through an encrypted channel. He wants to trade the Shinhwa data he stole for safe passage, but he needs you to verify the access. He still thinks he's in control. Gyeong-hwan pulled a 9mm handgun from a drawer and checked the magazine with a clinical click. He didn't hand it to her, not yet. We leave in 10 minutes. The liquidation is almost complete. The Miller hubs in LA and Houston are gone. His foundations are being seized by the IRS as we speak. He has nothing left but the clothes on his back and a dream of escaping to a country without an extradition treaty. Kestrel stood up. The pain in her ribs was a dull, each pulsing reminder of the man she was about to face. She felt the competence trap fully set. She wasn't just a witness. She was the key. You're going to let him think he's winning, Kestrel said, her voice turning cold and devoid of the girl who had screamed at the altar. You're going to let him get close. I'm going to let him reach for you, Gyeong-hwan corrected, and then I'm going to let you decide if he lives long enough to see the sunrise. The seductive danger in the room was palpable. Gyeong-hwan reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Some people want a hero, Kestrel, but you've always belonged to the dark. Don't blink when it's time to strike. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. And Kestrel, the Shinhwa Syndicate doesn't forgive debts, but they do respect power. You show them which one you represent? As the door closed, Kestrel looked at the tablet one last time. The red dot was getting closer to the pier. She felt the phoenix within her, the girl who had poisoned her father, the woman who had hidden billions, fully take flight. The justice is just beginning, but are you part of the family yet? Hit that subscribe button on my Afro-Korean boss stories right now. If you're really going to walk away without subscribing after Gyeong-hwan just revealed the truth about his brother, tell us your excuse in the comments. Are you as cold as the Mafia boss himself, or are you just another bystander? The drive to the coast was a silent symphony of digital warfare. Kestrel sat in the back of the armored SUV, the blue light of a laptop illuminating her sharp features. She wasn't just a passenger. She was the ghost in the machine. While Gyeong-hwan's soldiers handled the steel and lead, Kestrel handled the ether. He's cycling through his secondary backups, Kestrel murmured, her fingers dancing across the keys. She had accessed T-Rowe's private cloud, a secure server he thought was impenetrable. He's trying to move the remaining liquid assets from the Savannah Shell Company to a crypto tumbler. Gyeong-hwan sat beside her, cleaning a knife with a silk cloth. The rhythmic slop-slop of the blade was the only sound in the cabin, besides the hum of the engine. Can he move them? Not without my handshake, Kestrel said, a cold smile touching her lips. I've locked the routing protocols. Every time he tries to click transfer, he's not sending money. He's sending a ping to our GPS. This was the justice fantasy at its peak. Kestrel wasn't just watching T-Rowe lose, she was the one pulling the floor out from under him. She watched a live feed on the screen, a grainy CCTV shot from a gas station in Long Island. T-Rowe was there, pacing by a black Mercedes, his white wedding tuxedo now stained and rumpled. He looked frantic, hitting the tablet with the heel of his hand like a broken toy. He looked small, Kestrel whispered. Every man looks small when his shadows cut away, Gyeong-hwan replied. He leaned over, looking at the data streams on her screen. He's a parasite, Kestrel. Without the host, your father's infrastructure, and your intellect. He's just a man with a loud voice and a gold gun. The SUV surged forward, the speedometer climbing as they bypassed the main tolls. Gyeong-hwan's team had already cleared the path, using Shinhwa influence to turn every light green and every traffic camera dark. The Russians are 10 minutes out from the Atlantic City pier, the driver, June, announced. One cutter armed. They aren't there for rescue. They're there for a transaction. If T-Rowe doesn't have the codes, they'll kill him themselves to avoid the Shinhwa's wrath. Gyeong-hwan stood up in the moving vehicle, reaching for a heavy tactical vest. Then we make sure he feels the weight of his failure before he dies. Kestrel, keep the accounts frozen. I want him to see the zero balance on his screen the moment I step onto that pier. Wait, Kestrel said, looking up from the laptop. If I shut it down completely, he might kill himself before you get there. He needs a sliver of hope, a ghost transaction that looks like it's pending. Gyeong-hwan paused, his hand on the door handle. He looked at her, not as a victim he was protecting, but as a strategist who surpassed his own coldness. Give him the ghost, Gyeong-hwan said, his voice thick with a dark, appreciative pride. Let him think he's 1 second away from freedom. It makes the fall much sweeter. He reached out and squeezed her shoulder, a gesture of absolute alignment. You're doing well, Kestrel. The accountant is dead. The architect is waking up. As the SUV slowed, the smell of salt spray and rotting wood began to seep through the vents. They had reached the outskirts of Atlantic City. The boardwalk loomed like a skeletal neon ghost in the distance. Kestrel felt a surge of vindication. For years, she had been the hidden brain, the silent support, the woman who made men like her father and T-Rowe look like geniuses. Now, she was the one turning the world gray. I've initiated the pending loop. Kestrel said, closing the laptop with a definitive thud. He has a processing bar on his screen. It'll stay at 99% forever. Gyeong-hwan checked his watch. Perfect timing. The Russians have just docked. T-Rowe is pulling onto the pier. The SUV came to a halt behind a row of abandoned shipping containers. Gyeong-hwan's men spilled out like ink, vanishing into the rain-slicked shadows. Gyeong-hwan turned back to Kestrel, his flinty eyes locking onto hers. Stay in the car until June gives the signal. The monster needs to clear the stage first. I'm not staying in the car, Kestrel said, her voice hard as diamond. She reached into the side pocket of her seat and pulled out a small, sleek pistol Gyeong-hwan had left there, the same one she'd been eyeing. I want to see his face when he realizes the 99% isn't a glitch. I want to see the moment he realizes I am the glitch. Gyeong-hwan stared at her for a long beat. The seductive danger between them reached a fever pitch. He didn't argue. He didn't tell her it was too dangerous. He simply reached out, tucked a stray lock of her dark hair behind her ear, and nodded. Then bring the rain, Kestrel. As the door opened, the roar of the Atlantic and the cold sting of the rain hit them. In the distance, the headlights of T-Rowe's Mercedes cut through the fog, heading straight for the trap. The liquidation was no longer about money. It was about the total erasure of a man who had forgotten that the most dangerous weapon in a war isn't a gun. It's the person who knows where all the secrets are buried. The rain in Atlantic City was different from the rain in Atlanta. Here, it tasted of salt and industrial grease, washing over the windshield of the SUV in heavy, rhythmic sheets. As Kestrel stepped out into the cold, the sound of the ocean crashing against the pier triggered something deep in her mind. The present blurred. The smell of the salt morphed into the delicate, cloying scent of Earl Grey tea and expensive lilies. Flashback 6 hours before the wedding. The morning sun had been too bright, cutting through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Johnson penthouse like a spotlight. Kestrel stood in her bridal suite, the Vera Wang gown hanging on a mannequin behind her like a ghost waiting to be inhabited. Her father, Abraham, had walked in, smelling of bourbon and victory. He didn't look at her face. He looked at the safe behind her desk. The codes, Kestrel, he had said, his voice gratingly cheerful. T-Rowe wants them as a gesture of good faith before the ceremony. He's worried you're getting cold feet. I'm not an asset, Dad, she had replied, her voice flat. I'm your daughter. Don't be sentimental. It's beneath your IQ. Abraham snapped, pouring himself a cup of tea from the silver service on her table. You're a bridge. Once we cross into the Miller infrastructure, you'll have everything you ever wanted. Just give him the access. Kestrel had watched him. She looked at the bruises on her ribs, fresh from T-Rowe's visit the night before, and then at the man who had sold her to a monster to save his own failing margins. I'll give him what he deserves, she whispered. When Abraham turned his back to answer a phone call, Kestrel's hands moved with the clinical speed of an expert. From the hidden compartment in her makeup vanity, she pulled a small amber vial, digitalis, a concentrated extract in small doses, a heart medication. In the concentration she had distilled in her private lab, a death sentence, she didn't hesitate. She didn't cry. With a steady hand, she tipped the vial into the silver teapot. She watched the clear liquid swirl into the dark amber of the Earl Grey. 1 swallow for the ribs, 2 for the years of silence, 3 for the brother Gyeong-hwan lost. She knew the tea would take hours to work. It would sit in his system, a ticking clock of cardiac arrest, timed perfectly for the moment he would share the communion chalice with T-Rowe. She hadn't just been planning an escape. She had been choreographing a double execution. She wanted T-Rowe to hold the cup when her father died. She wanted the world to see the prince standing over the corpse of the king. Present day, the Atlantic City pier, the memory receded as Gyeong-hwan's hand touched her shoulder, grounding her back in the freezing rain. "You're thinking about the tea," he said. It wasn't a question. He stood beside her, his silhouette sharp against the neon flickering of a distant casino sign. Kestrel looked at him, her eyes wide. "You said you watched me buy the digitalis. You knew I was going to do it." "I knew you were capable of it," Gyeong-hwan corrected. His voice was a low, melodic rasp that seemed to harmonize with the roar of the waves. "Most people are victims because they wait for the world to be fair. You realize the world is a ledger, and the only way to balance it is to strike out the debt yourself." He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. The heat of his skin was a stark contrast to the icy rain. "But you made one mistake, Kestrel. You thought you could walk away after the kill. You thought you could take the 3 billion and vanish into a life of peace. But once you taste the blood of the people who caged you, there is no going back to the sunlight." The emotional rhythm of the moment shifted from vindication to seductive danger. Kestrel realized that Gyeong-hwan hadn't saved her because he pitied her. He had saved her because he recognized a fellow predator. He was the devil she had invited to her side, and now the bill was due. "I don't want the sunlight," Kestrel said, her voice hardening, matching the steel of the gun in her hand. "I want the chair my father died in. I want the empire they thought I was too weak to hold." Gyeong-hwan's lip curled into that dark, impressed smile. He stepped closer, his chest pressing against her arm. "Then let's finish the ledger. T-Rowe is on the pier. He's staring at a screen that says 99% loading. He's at his most desperate. That is when a man is most honest." In the distance, the headlights of the Mercedes cut through the fog. The car came to a screeching halt 50 yards from the edge of the pier, where a sleek black Russian cutter was waiting in the choppy water. T-Rowe stumbled out of the driver's seat. He looked pathetic. The white tuxedo was gray with road grime, his hair plastered to his forehead. He held a briefcase in one hand and a tablet in the other, waving them toward the boat. "I have the codes," T-Rowe screamed into the wind. "Just let me on the boat. The transfer is almost complete." Gyeong-hwan looked at Kestrel. "He doesn't know the 99% is a loop you built. He thinks he's 1 second away from being a billionaire again." "He's 1 second away from realizing he's a ghost," Kestrel replied. They began to walk down the pier, their footsteps swallowed by the sound of the storm. Gyeong-hwan's men moved like shadows in the periphery, cutting off the exits. The Russians on the boat stood on the deck, their rifles leveled not at Gyeong-hwan, but at T-Rowe. They were businessmen. They didn't deal with men whose accounts were frozen by the Shinhwa Syndicate. This was the competence trap in its final form. T-Rowe had the briefcase, he had the name, and he had the ambition. But Kestrel had the keys to the kingdom, and Gyeong-hwan had the sword to guard it. "Terrence," Gyeong-hwan's voice rang out clear and lethal. T-Rowe spun around, his boots slipping on the wet wood. His eyes went wide as he saw the man he feared most and the woman he thought he had broken. "Kestrel," he wheezed, his voice cracking. "Kestrel, tell them to finish the transfer. I'll give you half. We can go to Russia together." Kestrel stepped out from behind Gyeong-hwan, the rain matting her hair to her face. She looked at the man who had bruised her ribs and tried to steal her life. She didn't feel anger. She felt a cold, clinical disgust. "The transfer isn't stuck, T-Rowe," she said, her voice carrying over the wind. "It's deleted. There is no money. There is no us. There is only the debt you owe the Shinhwa." She held up her phone, the screen glowing red. With one thumb, she swiped. On T-Rowe's tablet, the 99% flickered and vanished, replaced by a single mocking line of text. "Account liquidated. Access denied." T-Rowe stared at the screen. The briefcase slipped from his hand, spilling stacks of useless, non-sequential bills into the puddles. He looked at the boat, then at Gyeong-hwan, and finally at the gun in Kestrel's hand. "You?" T-Rowe stuttered. You killed your father. I saw the vial in your room, Kestrel. I knew I was going to protect you. You weren't going to protect me, Kestrel said, taking a step forward, the phoenix fully risen. You were going to use it to blackmail me, but you forgot one thing, T-Rowe. Dead men can't tell secrets. Gyeong-hwan stepped up beside her, his hand resting on the small of her back, urging her forward. The dark choice was mere seconds away. The hunt did not begin in the Hamptons. It ended on this pier, but the momentum had the frantic, jagged energy of a cornered animal fleeing a burning estate. The Russian cutter, a sleek silhouette of black carbon fiber against the gray Atlantic, began to reverse its engines. The Russians were specialists in extraction, but they were also specialists in survival. They saw the Shinhwa Syndicate markings on the tactical gear of the men appearing from the shadows. They saw Gyeong-hwan. The deal was dead. T-Rowe was no longer a client. He was a liability. Wait! T-Rowe screamed at the departing boat, his voice cracking as the gap between the pier and the hull widened. I have the codes. I have the Savannah access. A Russian operative on the deck, clad in a heavy pea coat, simply shook his head and spit into the water. He didn't waste a bullet. The boat roared, its high-performance engines churning the salt water into a frothy white madness as it sped into the fog, leaving T-Rowe alone on the wet wood. T-Rowe turned back, his eyes darting like a trapped rat's. He was surrounded. Gyeong-hwan's hitters had formed a semicircle, and their suppressed rifles leveled with cold mechanical indifference. This was the fast rhythm of the narrative, the systematic closing of the cage. You think you've won? T-Rowe hissed, backing toward the edge of the pier. He reached into his rumpled tuxedo jacket, pulling out a small detonator. I wired the Johnson distribution centers. If I don't punch in a heartbeat code every 30 minutes, the entire Savannah infrastructure goes up in flames. Billions in Shinhwa inventory. Gyeong-hwan, you kill me, you lose everything. Gyeong-hwan didn't stop walking. He didn't even slow down. The rain slicked his hair back, making his features look like they were carved from granite. You're talking about the server farm on 4th Street? Gyeong-hwan asked, his voice conversational and terrifying. Up the one guarded by the 4 men you hired from the Jersey docks? T-Rowe's thumb hovered over the red button. I'll do it. I swear to God. Gyeong-hwan pulled his phone from his pocket and turned the screen toward T-Rowe. It was a live feed. The server farm was already swarming with Shinhwa cleaners. The 4 guards were face down on the concrete. A technician was calmly unplugging the detonator leads. The problem with mediocre men, Terrence, is that they think everyone else is as slow as they are, Gyeong-hwan said. The realization hit T-Rowe like a physical blow. The system-protected parasite was finally without a system. His money was gone. His leverage was dismantled, and his protectors had sailed away. He dropped the detonator. It hit a puddle with a pathetic clink. Kestrel, T-Rowe pleaded, looking at her with a desperate, watery hope. Kestrel, baby, remember what we talked about? The house in Grand Cayman? We can still go. I love you. Kestrel stepped forward, the 9mm heavy in her hand. She felt the vindication bubbling up, a hot, dark tide. She remembered the cracked ribs. She remembered the way he had looked at her father's dying body with a smile. The only thing you love is the sound of your own voice, Terrence, she said. Her voice was steady, devoid of the tremor that had defined her life for years. And I'm tired of listening. She leveled the gun at his shoulder. She didn't want him dead, not yet. She wanted him to feel the weight of the floor disappearing. Wait, Gyeong-hwan said, placing a hand on her wrist. He wasn't stopping her. He was adjusting her aim. If you're going to do it like a boss. Don't shoot out of anger. Shoot out of necessity. The seductive danger was at its peak. Kestrel could feel Gyeong-hwan's heartbeat through his palm on her arm. He was molding her, turning the accountant into a weapon. Suddenly, the perimeter lights of the pier flickered. A new sound joined the roar of the ocean, the rhythmic chopping beat of heavy lift helicopters. Searchlights began to cut through the fog, but they weren't blue and red. They were the blinding white of federal intervention. FBI, drop the weapons. A megaphone boomed from the sky. The trap had a second layer. Gyeong-hwan didn't look surprised. He looked at his watch. Right on time. He looked at Kestrel, his flinty eyes reflecting the blinding white light of the descending helicopters. This is the moment, Kestrel. The world thinks you're a victim. T-Rowe thinks you're his property. The feds think you're a witness. Who are you? T-Rowe saw the helicopters and felt a surge of renewed life. The feds! Thank God! I'm a federal informant. I have evidence on the Shinhwa. He began to run toward the light, waving his arms like a madman. He thought the system was coming to save its favorite parasite. He didn't see Gyeong-hwan's men melting back into the shadows. He didn't see the cold, calculated way Kestrel tracked his movement with the barrel of her gun. The liquidation was about to move from the shadows into the light. The world was no longer gray. It was a blinding, artificial white. 3 heavy lift helicopters hovered over the pier, their rotors whipping the rain into a cyclonic frenzy that threatened to tear the very wood from the pilings. The megaphone's voice was a godlike roar, demanding surrender. But on the ground, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and impending blood. T-Rowe was sprinting toward the perimeter of the light, his arms flailing. Over here, I'm Terrence Miller. I have the testimony. I have everything. He was laughing now, a manic, high-pitched sound. The parasite believed the host had changed from a mafia boss to the United States government. Gyeong-hwan stood perfectly still. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't signal his men to fire. He simply watched T-Rowe with a look of profound, clinical boredom. Stop him, Kestrel, Gyeong-hwan said. His voice was barely a whisper, yet it cut through the thunder of the helicopters. Kestrel didn't hesitate. She leveled the 9mm, her feet planted firm on the slick pier. She squeezed the trigger. Crack! The bullet caught T-Rowe in the back of the thigh. So he didn't just fall, he tumbled, his momentum carrying him through a series of messy rolls until he came to a stop 10 feet from the pier's edge. He let out a shriek of agony, clutching at the wound that was now pumping bright arterial red into the salt water. The searchlights converged on Kestrel. Kestrel Johnson, drop the weapon. We are here to extract you. Kestrel didn't drop the gun. She didn't even flinch at the public collapse of her image as a victim. She turned her body, the barrel of the gun moving in a slow, deliberate arc away from the dying T-Rowe and directly toward Gyeong-hwan's chest. I'm not being extracted, Kestrel shouted, her voice amplified by the sheer force of her resolve. Gyeong-hwan's eyes widened slightly, not with fear, but with a dark, electric fascination. He stepped closer, the muzzle of the gun pressing into the fine charcoal wool of his suit right over his heart. You have the codes to the Savannah accounts, Gyeong-hwan, Kestrel said, her voice now a cold instrument of power. But you don't have the keys to the Seoul Bank. You don't have the offshore routing for the $3 billion that my father hid under the Shinhwa's own nose. I know you have them, Kestrel, Gyeong-hwan replied. He didn't move to disarm her. He seemed to enjoy the sensation of the steel against his chest. That's why you're alive. No, Kestrel countered. You're alive because I haven't pulled this trigger. The syndicate doesn't follow you because they love you, Gyeong-hwan. They follow you because you're the one who keeps the money moving. If I kill you, the Shinhwa board doesn't go after me. They negotiate with me. Yeah, because I am the only one left who can unlock that wealth. This was the dark choice. Kestrel was no longer choosing between the princes who had failed her and the monster who had saved her. She was choosing herself. I have exactly 3 billion reasons to walk away from this pier alone, she said. If you let me and T-Rowe go, I'll give you half. If you try to take me into your sanctuary as a prisoner, I'll burn the codes, I'll kill you, and I'll let the feds take whatever is left of the Johnson Empire. The seductive danger between them was so heavy it felt like a physical weight. Gyeong-hwan reached out, his hand wrapping around hers, not to take the gun, but to steady it. There's a third option, Kestrel, he whispered, leaning in so his lips were inches from her ear. You think these feds are here for justice? Look at the insignia on the lead helicopter. Kestrel glanced up. The searchlight shifted, revealing not the FBI seal, but a stylized black eagle. Interpol's Specialized Financial Crimes Unit. And standing at the open door of the lead bird was a man she recognized, a high-ranking Shinhwa executive from the Seoul office. The final twist began to unravel in her mind. Gyeong-hwan hadn't been working for the syndicate. He had been working with the authorities to purge the syndicate's American liabilities, including her father and T-Rowe. He was the cleaner, but not for the Mafia. He was the cleaner for the global system that didn't want a messy gang war. They aren't here for me, Kestrel, Gyeong-hwan said, his voice thick with a strange, tragic tenderness. They're here for you. You poisoned Abraham. You laundered the $3 billion. You're the only person left who can be the face of this entire conspiracy. They need a martyr, and Gyeong-hwan doesn't leave witnesses. Then kill me, Kestrel challenged, her finger tightening on the trigger. Gyeong-hwan's grip on her hand tightened. I spent 3 years watching a lion grow in a den of vipers. I'm not going to let them put you in a cage. Suddenly, the searchlights intensified. Final warning, drop the weapon or we open fire. T-Rowe, bleeding out on the wood, started to crawl. Help me, she's the one. She killed them all. Gyeong-hwan looked at the helicopters, then back at Kestrel. His apex predator persona was gone, replaced by something raw and sacrificial. You wanted to be a boss, Kestrel. A boss knows when to burn the bridge behind them. He grabbed her hand, the gun still between them, and it began to back toward the edge of the pier. The waves below were a churning black abyss, 50 feet of a drop into the freezing Atlantic. If we stay, they owned you, Gyeong-hwan said. If we jump, we're ghosts. And if I pull the trigger, Kestrel asked, then you're just like them, he replied. The helicopters began their descent, the wind from the rotors nearly knocking them off their feet. T-Rowe was screaming, the feds were shouting, and the world was collapsing into a singular point of white light. Kestrel looked at Gyeong-hwan, the man who had watched her, protected her, and ultimately betrayed the system to keep her free. She didn't lower the gun. She didn't give him the codes. I'm not a ghost, Gyeong-hwan, she said, her voice finally breaking with a surge of terrifying power. I'm the storm. She's got the gun to his chest. Is she going to pull the trigger or jump into the abyss? You wouldn't want to miss the final seconds of this massacre, would you? Subscribe to my Afro-Korean boss stories so you never miss a heartbeat. If you're still holding out, tell us why in the comments. What does a story need to do to earn your sub? A $3 billion heist isn't enough for you? Tell us what is. The white light was so bright it felt heavy, a physical weight pressing against Kestrel's skin. The rotors of the helicopters were no longer just a sound. They were a heartbeat, thumping in her chest, drowning out the pathetic, wet whimpers of T-Rowe as he bled into the Atlantic City wood. Gyeong-hwan didn't flinch. Even with the barrel of the 9mm digging into his heart, his eyes remained a calm, flinty sea. He was waiting. And he had spent 3 years waiting for her to decide what kind of monster she would be. The money stays locked, Gyeong-hwan, Kestrel said, her voice a low, lethal hum, unless I'm the one holding the key. I never wanted the money, Kestrel, he whispered. The wind caught his words, carrying them toward the black abyss behind them. I wanted the girl who was smart enough to steal it, and I wanted the woman who was brave enough to keep it. The lead helicopter tilted, its searchlight locking onto them with predatory intent. We are authorized to use lethal force. Drop the weapon. Kestrel looked past Gyeong-hwan toward the man in the open door of the chopper, the Shinhwa executive. He wasn't there for a rescue. He was holding a thermal scope rifle. He didn't want the codes. He wanted the witness eliminated. so the $3 billion could be declared a total loss and written off in a global insurance fraud. Gyeong-hwan saw her realization. He saw the moment she understood that the princes of the corporate world were far more dangerous than the monsters of the Mafia. They won't let us walk, Kestrel, Gyeong-hwan said, his hand sliding over hers on the gun. His grip was warm, solid, the only real thing in a world of flashing lights and lies. Jump. I don't know how to swim in this suit, she said, a flash of her old wit flickering through the terror. Then fly. Gyeong-hwan suddenly lunged, not away from her, but into her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back toward the railing. At that exact microsecond, a red laser dot bloomed on Kestrel's forehead. Crack! The sound of a single sniper shot rang out, echoing off the concrete piers and the hull of the Russian cutter. Kestrel felt a sharp, searing heat graze her shoulder. She didn't have time to scream. The world tilted. The blinding white light of the searchlights was replaced by the infinite coal black of the night sky. They hit the water together. The Atlantic was a crushing, icy vice. The weight of the tactical gear and the black suit dragged them down into the silent dark. For a moment, there was nothing but the roar of bubbles and the stinging salt in her eyes. Then a hand grabbed hers. Gyeong-hwan, he kicked upward, his strength immense, pulling her toward the surface. But as they broke the water beneath the shadow of the pier, a second sound erupted from above. Splash. A body hit the water 20 feet away, T-Rowe. So whether he had been pushed or had fallen in his attempt to crawl toward the light, it didn't matter. The blood from his leg was a dark cloud in the water, a dinner bell for the currents. Kestrel looked up. The helicopters were hovering like vultures, their lights scanning the surface. Stay under, Gyeong-hwan hissed, his face inches from hers in the dark water. He pulled her toward the structural pilings of the pier, a forest of barnacle-encrusted wood where the light couldn't reach. They watched as the helicopters eventually banked away, moving toward the open ocean, chasing the ghost of a $3 billion trail. The world thought Kestrel Johnson and the Korean Mafia boss were dead. Gyeong-hwan pulled a small waterproof transmitter from his belt. It flashed green twice. The boat is 5 minutes out. A freighter headed for Seoul. Kestrel leaned her head against a damp piling, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the burner phone. It was soaked, dead, and useless. She let it sink into the dark water. The codes are in my head, Gyeong-hwan, she said, her voice finally cold and devoid of the girl who had screamed at the altar. And I'm not giving them to the syndicate. Gyeong-hwan looked at her, the water dripping from his jaw, a dark, impressed smile playing on his lips. I know, that's why we're not going to the syndicate. We're going to build our own. The screen cuts to black. Did they really make it? Or is the Atlantic just a cold grave for their secrets? Only those who have joined the family at my Afro-Korean boss stories will be there when the first episode of the sequel, The Soul Takeover, Kestrel's Throne, drops. We've got an irresistible preview of Gyeong-hwan's true plan and the moment Kestrel walks into the Shinhwa boardroom in Korea to claim her $3 billion. Don't be left on the pier. Subscribe now and tell us in the comments what you think Kestrel's first move as the new boss will be. See you in the next story where the debt is always paid in full.